Hinterkaifeck murders. The Hinterkaifeck murders occurred on the evening of March 31, 1922, in which 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmstead, located approximately 70 kilometers, 43 miles, north of Munich, Germany, were murdered by an unknown assailant. However, the appealing factor about these murders are strange circumstances surrounding them. 1. 6 months before the attack, the family made quit. It has been widely claimed that her reason for leaving was that she had heard strange sounds in the attic and believed the house to be haunted, but this is unsubstantiated. Nothing in her statement to the police suggests this. 2. Andreas Gruber, one of the victims, found a strange newspaper from Munich on the property in March 1922. He could not remember buying it, and thus Gruber initially believed that the postman had lost the newspaper. This was amusing because no one in the vicinity subscribed to the paper. 3. Just days before the murders, Gruber told neighbors he discovered tracks in the fresh snow that led from the forest to a broken door lock in the farm's machine room. 4. Later during the night they heard footsteps in the attic, but Gruber found no one when he searched the building. Although he told several people about these alleged observations, he refused to accept help and the details went unreported to the police. According to a school friend of the 7-year-old Kazilia Gabriel, the young girl and one of the 6 victims reported that her mother Victoria had fled the farm the night before the act after a violent quarrel and only hours later had been found in the forest. On March 31, 1992, the family was lured into the barn and killed. The perpetrator or perpetrators then moved into the house where they lived for 4 days. Yes, 4 days. This is known because, on the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, the artisan Michael Plöckl happened to pass by Hinterkaifeck. Plöckl observed that the oven had been heated by someone. That person had approached him with a lantern and blinded him, whereupon he hastily continued on his way. Plöckl also noticed that the smoke from the fireplace had a disgusting smell. This instance was not investigated and there were no investigations conducted to determine what had been burned that night in the oven. On April 1 at 3 a.m., the farmer and butcher Simon Rieschlinder, on the way home near Brunnen, saw 2 unknown figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they turned around so that their faces could not be seen. Later, when he heard of the murders in Hinterkaifeck, he thought it possible that the strangers might be involved. In the middle of May 1927, a stranger was said to have stopped a resident of Weihaufen at midnight. He asked him questions about the murder and then shouted that he was the murderer before he ran into the woods. The stranger was never identified. Though there were several suspects initially, all of them were ruled out and the murders remain unsolved to this day. It is creepy to think somebody can not just murder an entire family but also live in their house for days and yet not get caught. The circumstances and facts pose a wide range of questions which will never know answers. Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is a 725-kilometer corridor of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada, which has been the location of many murders and disappearances beginning in 1970. The phrase was coined during a vigil held in Terrace in 1998, by Florence Nightingale, who was thinking of the victims' families crying over their loved ones. There is a disproportionately high number of Indigenous women on the list of victims. The Wikipedia entry covers the details of some of the victims, but the original estimate for the number of disappearances or murders is over 40. Proposed explanations for the years-long endurance of the crimes and the limited progress in identifying culprits include poverty, drug abuse, widespread domestic violence, disconnection with traditional culture and disruption of the family unit through the foster care system and Canadian Indian residential school system. Poverty in particular leads to low rates of car ownership and mobility. Thus, hitchhiking is often the only way for many to travel vast distances to see family or go to work, school, or seek medical treatment. Another factor leading to abductions and murders is that the area is largely isolated and remote, with soft soil in many areas and carnivorous scavengers to carry away human remains. These factors precipitate violent attacks, as perpetrators feel a sense of impunity, privacy, and the ability to easily carry out their crimes and hide evidence. But such explanations often give rise to unsettling questions. Aren't there other poverty-stricken areas around the world where such crimes don't happen? Aren't such explanations but an attempt to cover up for inadequate investigations? Some critics argue that the lack of results arising from this investigation is the result of systemic racism. One of the key controversies is the email scandal. On October 22, 2015, Elizabeth Denham, the Information and Privacy Commissioner of British Columbia, published a 65-page report outlining how BC government officials had triple-deleted emails relating to the Highway of Tears. In her report Access Denied, Denham describes the act of triple-deleting as transferring an email to the deleted folder on a computer system, deleting the email from the folder and then overriding the backup that admits the system to retrieve deleted items. By deleting these files, Denham states the government had breached the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This leads to the unanswered question of why such cover-up was deemed necessary. After years of multiple investigations, Sergeant Wayne Clary said they may never solve all of the cases and that it will be the people in the communities that are going to solve these crimes. They do have persons of interest in several cases, but not enough evidence to lay. Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Russian hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between 1 and February 2, 1959, in uncertain circumstances. The experienced trekking group, who were all from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, had established a camp on the slopes of Kalatsyakl, in an area now named in honor of the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. During the night, something caused them to cut their way out of their tents and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 had died from hypothermia while the other 3 showed signs of physical trauma. 1 victim had a fractured skull, 2 others had major chest fractures, 1 body was missing both its eyes, and 1 was missing a tongue. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, avalanche, katabatic winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these. It is worth noting that each member of the group was an experienced Grade 2 hiker with ski tour experience, and would be receiving Grade 3 certification upon their return. At the time, this was the highest certification available in the Soviet Union, and required candidates to traverse 300 kilometers. The explanation put forth was that of an avalanche. This however seemed to lack any credibility as 1. The location of the incident did not have any obvious signs of an avalanche having taken place. An avalanche would have left certain patterns and debris distributed over a wide area. The bodies found within a month of the event were covered with a very shallow layer of snow and, had there been an avalanche of sufficient strength to sweep away the second party, these bodies would have been swept away as well. This would have caused more serious and different injuries in the process and would have damaged the tree line. 2. Over 100 expeditions to the region were held since the incident, and none of them ever reported conditions that might create an avalanche. A study of the area using up-to-date terrain-related physics revealed that the location was entirely unlikely for such an avalanche to have occurred. The dangerous conditions found in another nearby area, which had significantly steeper slopes and cornices, were observed in April and May when the snowfalls of winter were melting. During February, when the incident occurred, there were no such conditions. 3. An analysis of the terrain and the slope shows that even if there could have been a very specific avalanche that found its way around, its path would have gone past the tent. It had collapsed from the side but not in a horizontal direction. 4. Dyatlov was an experienced skier and the much older Zolotaryov was studying for his master's certificate in ski instruction and mountain hiking. Neither of these 2 men would have been likely to camp anywhere in the path of a potential avalanche. 5. Footprint patterns leading away from the tent were inconsistent with someone, let alone a group of 9 people, running in panic from either real or imagined danger. All the footprints leading away from the tent and towards the woods were consistent with individuals who were walking at a normal pace. Speculation exists that the campsite fell within the path of a Soviet parachute mine exercise. This theory alleges that the hikers, woken by loud explosions, fled the tent in a shoeless panic and found themselves unable to return for supply retrieval. After some members froze to death attempting to endure the bombardment, others commandeered their clothing only to be fatally injured by subsequent parachute mine concussions. There are indeed records of parachute mines being tested by the Soviet military in the area around the time the hikers were there. Parachute mines detonate while still in the air rather than upon striking the Earth's surface and produce signature injuries similar to those experienced by the hikers, heavy internal damage with comparably less external trauma. The theory coincides with reported sightings of glowing, orange orbs floating or falling in the sky within the general vicinity of the hikers and allegedly photographed by them, potentially military aircraft or descending parachute mines. This theory, among others, uses scavenging animals to explain Dubinina's injuries. Some speculate the bodies were unnaturally manipulated due to characteristic livor mortis markings discovered during an autopsy, as well as burns to hair and skin. Photographs of the tent allegedly show that it was erected incorrectly, something the experienced hikers were unlikely to have done. A similar theory alleges the testing of radiological weapons and is partly based on the discovery of radioactivity on some of the clothing as well as the bodies being described by relatives as having orange skin and gray hair. However, radioactive dispersal would have affected all of the hikers and equipment instead of just some of it, and the skin and hair discoloration can be explained by a natural process of mummification after 3 months of exposure to the cold and winds. Furthermore, the initial suppression of files regarding the group's disappearance by Soviet authorities is sometimes mentioned as evidence of a cover-up, but the concealment of information regarding domestic incidents was standard procedure in the USSR and therefore far from peculiar. And by the late 1980s, all Dyatlov files had been released in some manner. However, an investigation that concluded as late as 2019 still maintains avalanche theory in spite of all its holes. It is only fair to state that the youngsters might have unintentionally paid the price of walking into a territory of state secrets, unethical human experimentation in the United States. This Wikipedia entry goes into the details of several known unethical experiments conducted by the U.S. government. Prostitutes on the CIA payroll were instructed to lure clients back to the safe houses, where they were surreptitiously plied with a wide range of substances, including LSD, and monitored behind one-way glass. In 1957, with funding from a CIA-front organization, Dr. Ewan Cameron of the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada began MKUltra Sub-Project 68. Experiments were designed to first depattern individuals, erasing their minds and memories, reducing them to the mental level of an infant, and then to rebuild their personality in a manner of his choosing. To achieve this, Cameron placed patients under his care into drug-induced comas for up to 88 days, and applied numerous high-voltage electric shocks to them over the course of weeks or months, often administering up to 360 shocks per person. He would then perform what he called psychic driving experiments on the subjects, where he would repetitively play recorded statements, such as "You are a good wife and mother and people enjoy your company," through speakers he had implanted into blacked-out football helmets that he bound to the heads of the test subjects, for sensory deprivation purposes. The patients could do nothing but listen to these messages, played for 16 to 20 hours a day, for weeks at a time. In one case, Cameron forced a person to listen to a message non-stop for 101 days. Using CIA funding, Cameron converted the horse stables behind Allen Memorial into an elaborate isolation and sensory deprivation chamber where he kept patients locked in for weeks at a time. Cameron also induced insulin comas in his subjects by giving them large injections of insulin, twice a day, for up to 2 months at a time. Several of the children who Cameron experimented on were sexually abused, in at least one case by several men. One of the children was filmed numerous times performing sexual acts with high-ranking federal government officials, in a scheme set up by Cameron and other MKUltra researchers, to blackmail the officials to ensure further funding for the experiments. At Harvard University, in the late 1940s, researchers began performing experiments in which they tested diethylstilbestrol, a synthetic estrogen, on pregnant women at the Line-In Hospital of the University of Chicago. The women experienced an abnormally high number of miscarriages in babies with low birth weight, LBW. None of the women were told that they were being experimented on. In 1950, researchers at the Cleveland City Hospital ran experiments to study changes in cerebral blood flow. They injected people with spinal anesthesia, and inserted needles into their jugular veins and brachial arteries to extract large quantities of blood and, after massive blood loss which caused paralysis and fainting, measured their blood pressure. The experiment was often performed multiple times on the same subject. From 1950 through 1953, the U.S. Army sprayed chemicals over 6 cities in the United States and Canada, in order to test dispersal patterns of chemical weapons. Army records stated that the chemicals which were sprayed on the city of Winnipeg, Canada, included zinc-cadmium sulfide, which was not thought to be harmful. A 1997 study by the U.S. National Research Council found that it was sprayed at levels so low as not to be harmful. It said that people were normally exposed to higher levels in urban environments. The page covers further details of other such experiments, but the creepy part is, who is to say this doesn't still go